a forgotten cruise ship buried deep in the jungle, sealed secrets humming beneath its steel, and one woman who refused to stay silent. This is the story of Sienna Moore and the Odyssey, and the truth the world tried to erase. Before we dive in, drop your city in the comments. Subscribe if you believe truth should never be silenced, and share this video with someone who loves uncovering hidden mysteries. The ocean had always been a strange paradox for Sienna Moore, a place where silence wasn't heavy but soothing, a place where memories didn't scream but whispered. Years after leaving behind the greasy roar of engines and the endless clatter of tools in her mechanic's shop, she had reinvented herself as a solitary explorer of forgotten places, drifting from one derelict coastline to another, chasing ghosts the world had already stopped caring about. Yet, no matter how far she went, or how many rusted shipwrecks and lost cities she filmed, nothing ever filled the hollow space left by June, her sister, her only family, whose absence had carved a wound too deep to ever truly heal. It was in a dusty port town on the Honduran coast, on a rainy afternoon when the sea breeze smelled of salt and secrets, that Sienna's life quietly veered off course. She had been browsing a junk shop, the kind of place where fishermen sold old compasses and faded maps, when she found it. A battered maritime log with a cracked spine and pages so fragile they felt like they might crumble in her hands. Most of it was routine. Shipping manifest, cargo weights, dates long forgotten, until she turned a page and saw a red ring drawn around the characters D47, and, beneath it, 2 handwritten words, Metal Shadow. Something about those words ignited a spark in her. They didn't belong. They weren't part of the official records. And yet, they felt alive. A clue left behind by someone who wanted to be found. That night, long after the port town had gone quiet and the lights along the pier had blinked out, Sienna sat hunched over her laptop, layering scanned maritime maps with modern satellite imagery. Most of the sea was empty, but then she saw it. A faint, blurred shape near a stretch of unnamed coastline, far from any shipping lanes. No record mentioned a wreck there. No vessel had ever been logged in that area. It was a ghost. Her instincts screamed one thing: go there. Sienna had learned to trust those instincts. They'd kept her alive during long nights alone on the road, through engine failures in abandoned deserts, and through memories that burned hotter than molten steel. So, when that same gut feeling told her that something was waiting for her at those coordinates, she didn't hesitate. She cashed out her last freelance payment, sold her backup camera, and bought a weather-beaten skiff from a fisherman who looked like he hadn't trusted the sea in decades. When she mentioned D47, the man's eyes darkened. "No one goes there," he muttered, his Spanish-accented English heavy with superstition. "Compass doesn't work. Machines die. You go, you disappear." Sienna's lips curved into a faint smile. Not because she was fearless, she wasn't, but because it was already too late to turn back. She wasn't chasing a story this time. She was chasing something deeper, something to feel. Her preparations were precise and deliberate. She packed waterproof cameras, spare batteries, her grandfather's multi-tool, a solar charger, a weathered notebook, and one precious photograph. A girl with wide, joyful eyes and dark hair. June. That photo had followed her across continents, deserts, and oceans. Now it would follow her into the unknown. The first 2 days at sea passed quietly, eerily so. The engine of the skiff hummed steadily. Waves rocked beneath her like a lullaby, and seabirds circled overhead, their cries like messages from another world. At night, beneath a canopy of stars, Sienna recorded her thoughts into her chest-mounted camera. half for an audience she didn't know existed, half for herself. No land, no signal, just water, she whispered. It's peaceful here, like the world forgot I exist, and I think I'm okay with that. But peace is always a calm before something else. On the third morning, the sky turned strange, bruised and ominous. Heavy clouds rolled in like smoke, and the wind rose suddenly, slamming the skiff sideways. Then came the waves, tall, gray, merciless. Sienna fought the throttle, her hands blistering against the metal, but the sea didn't care about her effort. Her GPS blinked, stuttered, and died. The compass needle spun wildly. The rain lashed down in sheets so thick she could barely see. And then the engine stalled. Time collapsed into chaos. Minutes bled into hours. Eventually, Sienna stopped fighting. She shut off the engine, surrendered the skiff to the sea, and let the storm take her where it would. By nightfall, the violence was over. The ocean lay still, eerily still. A heavy fog crept across the water, swallowing horizon and sky. When she checked her instruments, her GPS displayed nothing but zeros, as if the world had erased her position. And that's when she heard it. A deep, rhythmic hum, metallic and alive, vibrating through the hull beneath her feet. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't an engine. It was something else. She leaned over the edge of the skiff, squinting into the black water. For a heartbeat, just one, she saw a shape. Vast, angular, then gone. Sleep deprivation, she whispered, though her trembling hands told another story. At dawn, the fog thinned just enough to reveal a shape on the horizon. At first, she thought it was a mountain. But as the sun bled through the mist, the outline sharpened. Straight lines, steel glinting between the trees. Her heart stopped. It wasn't a mountain. It was a ship. And not just any ship. Colossal, unnatural, rooted in the heart of a jungle where no vessel should ever be. By midday, Sienna's skiff scraped against a shoreline she couldn't find on any map, a twisted shore of black sand and choking mangroves. She stepped onto land, boots sinking into oily soil, the smell of salt and decay heavy in the air. She pressed record on her camera. Day 4, coordinates unknown, she whispered. I found land, and something is here. The hum was louder now, steady, pulsing, rising up through the ground itself. And it wasn't coming from the jungle. It was coming from beneath it. Driven by a mix of fear and relentless curiosity, Sienna pushed through the tangled undergrowth. Vines clawed at her jacket. Thorns scraped her skin. But still, she pushed forward, following that impossible vibration. And then she saw it. A wall of steel, half devoured by the earth, rivets, hull plating, and the unmistakable curve of a ship's side rising like a forgotten titan from the jungle floor. The name, barely visible through the layers of rust and moss, read Odyssey. Sienna staggered back, breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a shipwreck. This was a burial. And whatever was buried here was still alive. The air was thick with humidity, and the scent of rot and salt clung to Sienna's lungs as she stepped deeper into the jungle. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the earth itself was trying to pull her back. Twisted mangroves clawed at the sky, vines as thick as her arm draped from branches like ropes. Yet nothing, not the oppressive silence, not the biting insects, not even the unease coiling in her gut, could tear her attention away from the impossible sight rising before her. The Odyssey was real. Up close, the scale of it was monstrous. The corroded hull towered over the jungle canopy like a man-made cliff, its steel plates streaked with rust and swallowed by roots that had burrowed deep into the metal. Moss and algae painted it in shades of green and brown, and trees had grown up around it. their trunks curving against the ship's side as if nature itself had tried to erase its existence. But despite decades, maybe centuries, of decay, the ship stood firm. The jungle had not devoured it. It had grown around it. Sienna's boots sank into the wet earth as she approached the hull, her fingers trembling when they brushed against the cold, vibrating metal. The hum was stronger now, a low, mechanical pulse that seemed to come from deep within the ship's belly. It wasn't random. It was steady, deliberate, alive. "This isn't a wreck," she whispered into her camera, her voice shaken. "It's buried." Circling the massive structure, Sienna stumbled upon a half-collapsed staircase, rusted, twisted, and nearly consumed by vines. It led upward, toward what had once been a deck. Testing each step carefully, she began to climb. Metal groaned under her weight, flakes of rust falling into the underbrush below. At the top, the air shifted, cooler, heavier, and eerily still. The jungle's noise vanished entirely. There were no birds, no wind, nothing. The silence was unnatural. It didn't feel empty. It felt watchful. She drew her flashlight and stepped through a gaping doorway. The beam cut through the thick layers of dust that floated like ash in the stagnant air. Wallpaper peeled from the walls in curling sheets. Metal railings were coated in decades of grime, and yet the corridors were intact, untouched by looters or explorers. It was as though no one had ever been here. A corroded sign hung crooked above a doorway. Passenger Deck B. The lettering was printed in English and Cyrillic Russian. Sienna's heart thudded in her chest. "Multinational crew," she whispered into the recorder. "Passenger vessel, but there's no record of it anywhere." She moved cautiously down the narrow hallway, her footsteps echoing faintly against the metal floor. Room after room told the same story. Lives abruptly interrupted. A suitcase lay open on a bed, clothes still folded neatly inside. A child's crayon drawing of a smiling ship was taped to a wall. A pair of women's heels sat neatly beneath a chair, waiting for their owner to return. But no one ever had. In one cabin, a small plastic elephant lay beside a shattered mirror. In another, a book was left open, its pages yellowed and curling. A single silver fork rested in the hallway's dust, placed deliberately on the floor as if someone had meant to come back for it. "Why did no one return for any of this?" she murmured. The ship offered no answer. Deeper inside, Sienna reached what must have once been a dining hall. The chandelier above had mostly crumbled, but a single strand of crystals remained, swaying gently despite the absence of wind. The tables were still set, plates, glasses, even napkins folded in brittle shapes. The chairs were neatly aligned, pushed in as though the passengers had simply stepped away for a moment. It was too perfect, too deliberate. "This doesn't look abandoned," she said softly into the camera. "It looks staged." A sudden clang echoed from somewhere behind her. She spun around, flashlight slicing through the shadows. Nothing. Only the steady drip of water from a cracked pipe above. And beneath it all, the hum, deeper now, closer, like the heartbeat of the ship itself. She continued forward, passing through crew quarters where bunks were still made and personal belongings remained tucked away. It was in one of these rooms that she found a rusted locker hanging partially open. Inside was a sealed tin box. Sienna pried it open with her multi-tool. Inside, wrapped in brittle plastic, were pages, soaked, warped, and nearly illegible. But one line made her freeze. We were told it was medicine. It was not. It was a cook's journal, the words hurried, panicked, desperate. The writer, a man named I. Moreno, described how heavy crates had been loaded aboard in the dead of night without explanation. How the officers had stopped speaking to the crew. How passengers began collapsing, their skin cold to the touch. How they were suddenly locked below deck under the guise of quarantine. And then, the most chilling line of all, something is in the cargo hold. It hums. Sienna's blood ran cold. The hum, the one vibrating through the hull, through the ground, through her, it had been there all along. Suddenly, something heavy crashed 2 decks below. She flinched, heart pounding, and killed her flashlight. Another sound followed, softer, rhythmic, like footsteps sloshing through water. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the part of her that had spent years chasing truths no one else dared to face forced her to stay. And then she saw it. Just beyond the edge of the corridor's shadows, tall, unmoving, and gone in an instant, a silhouette. Her voice trembled as she whispered into the recorder, "I think someone's still here." Her pulse hammered in her ears as she pressed deeper into the ship. Each hallway felt stranger than the last. The deeper she went, the more she noticed, not the chaos of an evacuation, but an eerie order. Chairs tucked in, beds perfectly made. Even the dust seemed to have settled on purpose. It didn't feel abandoned, it felt paused. The Odyssey hadn't died. It had simply stopped, and whatever had stopped it might still be here. Sienna steadied her breathing and slid down the bulkhead with the tin box on her knees, the ship's a slow hum thrumming through the steel into her bones. Condensation beaded on the plastic-wrapped pages inside. When she peeled the film away, the smell was a mix of salt, rust, and paper left too long in a damp drawer. Across the top of the first legible sheet was a neat hand, already fraying into panic. I, Moreno, Galley, Day 6. Her flashlight shook as she angled it low to keep the beam from announcing her position. The words, though, did all the announcing she needed. They told us it was medicine. Extra cargo for a relief route. We loaded at night. No manifests, no questions. We were told not to talk. We cooked, we cleaned, we served. We did not ask. Sienna swallowed, letting the hum fill the silence she refused to break. It matched some buried rhythm of the ship, a low tide that never turned. Day 9. The officers don't come to the galley now. They eat somewhere else. The passengers are restless. We hear footsteps in the passageways at hours when there should be none. There's a new smell below. Metal, sweet, wrong. We keep the vents closed when we can. It doesn't help. A dark smear veiled the next lines as if a wet glove had dragged across still wet ink. Sienna traced the page's edge with her thumb, careful not to tear it, and turned. We were told it was medicine. It was not. It was a cook's journal, the words hurried, panicked, desperate. The writer, a man named I. Moreno, described how heavy crates had been loaded aboard in the dead of night without explanation. How the officers had stopped speaking to the crew. How passengers began collapsing, their skin cold to the touch. How they were suddenly locked below deck under the guise of quarantine. And then, the most chilling line of all, something is in the cargo hold. It hums. Sienna's blood ran cold. The hum, the one vibrating through the hull, through the ground, through her, it had been there all along. Suddenly, something heavy crashed 2 decks below. She flinched, heart pounding, and killed her flashlight. Another sound followed, softer, rhythmic, like footsteps sloshing through water. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the part of her that had spent years chasing truths no one else dared to face forced her to stay. And then she saw it. Just beyond the edge of the corridor's shadows, tall, unmoving, and gone in an instant, a silhouette. Her voice trembled as she whispered into the recorder, "I think someone's still here." Her pulse hammered in her ears as she pressed deeper into the ship. Each hallway felt stranger than the last. The deeper she went, the more she noticed, not the chaos of an evacuation, but an eerie order. Chairs tucked in, beds perfectly made. Even the dust seemed to have settled on purpose. It didn't feel abandoned, it felt paused. The Odyssey hadn't died. It had simply stopped. And whatever had stopped it might still be here. Sienna steadied her breathing and slid down the bulkhead with the tin box on her knees, the ship's a slow hum thrumming through the steel into her bones. Condensation beaded on the plastic-wrapped pages inside. When she peeled the film away, the smell was a mix of salt, rust, and paper left too long in a damp drawer. Across the top of the first legible sheet was a neat hand, already fraying into panic. I, Moreno, Galley, Day 6. Her flashlight shook as she angled it low to keep the beam from announcing her position. The words, though, did all the announcing she needed. They told us it was medicine. Extra cargo for a relief route. We loaded at night. No manifests, no questions. We were told not to talk. We cooked, we cleaned, we served. We did not ask. Sienna swallowed, letting the hum fill the silence she refused to break. It matched some buried rhythm of the ship, a low tide that never turned. Day 9. The officers don't come to the galley now. They eat somewhere else. The passengers are restless. We hear footsteps in the passageways at hours when there should be none. There's a new smell below. Metal, sweet, wrong. We keep the vents closed when we can. It doesn't help. A dark smear veiled the next lines as if a wet glove had dragged across still wet ink. Sienna traced the page's edge with her thumb, careful not to tear it, and turned. Day 12. Crates moved again. No markings. We heard a drop, like a drum rolled across the hold. The floor vibrated. Someone joked the ship was purring. I did not laugh. A breath hitched in Sienna's chest, purring, humming, living. She shifted and the tin box scraped. The sound skittered down the corridor and died. She waited. Nothing answered, just the steady drip from a pipe and the distant slide of metal as the ship settled deeper into itself. When the quiet felt safe again, she kept reading. Day 14. Passenger collapsed in the atrium. Blue lips, no fever. Captain said heat exhaustion. We're not hot. This air is not right. Cold and heavy. The crew from B-Deck say the officers have sealed sections. Quarantine, they say. For who? For what? No one is coughing. They keep us out of the hold. Sienna felt the pages lighten as the stack thinned. The hum seemed louder now, or perhaps the words just tuned her ear to it. Day 16. We were told to serve breakfast to empty tables. Plates set as if for inspection. Knives perfectly aligned. Maria said it looked like the ship made itself pretty for a guest. I told her not to say that out loud. The lights flickered. The cooktop snapped and went dead, then woke up again. My hands would not stop shaking, and I told no one. She pictured the dining hall with its brittle napkins and intact place settings, that single crystal strand swaying. Staged, not abandoned, posed. Day 18. Crates again. We were told to keep to our stations. I went to the cooler and the floor hummed just under my toes. It's the hold. It has to be the hold. A sound like a beehive far away. I asked the bosun if it was the engines. He said, "Engines don't sing." Her throat tightened at that. Engines don't sing. And yet, as a mechanic, she knew machines did more than rattle and roar. They had languages. This ship was speaking. Day 19. We are locked below. The officer with the scar said it is temporary. I said I have family in Belize who will come for me. He laughed. No one is coming, he said. The hum is louder. It is in the plates, in the utensils, in the bones of the ship. If I press my ear to the galley floor, I hear a pattern like waves. No, not waves. A pulse. It is counting something. I do not know what. The page after that was warped beyond recovery. Sienna eased it back into place and moved on. Day 21. Maria is sick, but she is cold and shivering and says she feels full of metal. I don't know what that means. She keeps asking me if I can hear the choir. There is no choir, only the hum. It gets inside words, inside thoughts. I tried to sleep and woke with my teeth hurting as if they were tuning forks. Quarantine, they say. But for what? Sienna exhaled slowly. A groan ran through the corridor, a long iron sigh. She looked up, half expecting the silhouette she'd seen to reappear, tall, still, wrong, but the passageway remained empty. The dust she'd kicked up hung in the beam like exhausted snow. She read on. Day 22. Captain stopped making announcements. The radio said, "Hold sealed. Contamination contained." The word contained is a prison word. We are the walls. Day 23. We heard someone banging from the other side of a bulkhead near the cold storage. Not like a person. Slower, heavier. Maria said, "Don't open." She is right. She is wrong. We can't be the ones who don't open when someone knocks. But it did not sound like knocking. The next lines had been pressed into the paper so hard the letters cut white grooves in the page. We were told it was medicine. It was not. Sienna's jaw clenched. She thought of the hazard symbols she glimpsed on the sealed doors, faded triangles half-eaten by corrosion. She thought of the voice on the radio she'd heard upstairs, thin and warped. Do not open. Hold. Contamination risk. Day 24. They took the keys. They took the manifests. They took the names. The men in suits were not ours, not the company's, not the Navy. They left on a launch at dawn, and no one waved goodbye. The officers won't look us in the eye. The hum is a wall now. When I speak, the words come out dull and heavy, like they sink to the floor. Day, the number was smeared. We served dinner to no one. I set a fork down, and it buzzed in my hand. In the glass, a ripple through the air was still. I wrote a letter to my sister and put it in my shoe. If anyone finds this, tell her I tried to be brave. Sienna closed her eyes. For a moment, the ship fell away and she saw June's laughing face at a sunlit dock. You promised we'd find out where the world ends, June had said, half teasing, half believing. We will, Sienna had promised. We will, together. And then life, like a storm that ignores maps. She forced her eyes open. There were only a few pages left. Last entry. If the ship keeps humming when we are gone, it means it worked. Not the medicine, the other thing. Whatever it was, they hid it here because the sea could not carry it, and the sky could not carry it, and the world would not admit it. The hold is singing to itself. If you are reading this, you're brave or foolish or both. Do not be the lid lifter. If you can, tell someone what they did. If you cannot, forgive us for staying quiet so long. Sometimes quiet is the only way to stay whole. The final line was not signed. The ink had feathered outward, as if written with a trembling hand. Beneath it, in a different pen, a single word had been pressed into the paper 3 times, the last cutting down to the pulp. Wait. Sienna sat motionless until her thighs hurt. Wait. The same word she'd seen scratched in dust, etched into wallpaper, whispered by that band of crystals in the dining hall as if vibrating to a message. Wait. For what? Rescue? Permission? The right person? A dull thud answered her question from deep below, a sound that was not a collapse and not a wave, a muscle flexing where no muscle should be. She rewrapped the journal pages with hands she had to will steady and placed them gently back into the tin. She slid the box into her pack and zipped it closed, then turned off her light. In the dark, the ship's hum had a shape. She could hear its rise and fall, the slight hesitation between pulses, the almost breath drawn before the next vibration. She angled her head. No, not breath, count, a pattern. Moreno had been right. Machines did not sing, not like this, but systems did. Systems counted. She clicked the light on again and pushed herself to her feet. The corridor outside the crew quarters led toward the center line. Somewhere ahead, a stairwell stitched decks together like a spine. She needed to see the bridge, she told herself, to confirm the ship's systems, to triangulate the hum's source. She needed data. Really, she needed one thing only: the hold. Sienna moved, quick and quiet, every step a negotiation with the old iron that creaked underfoot. She passed doorways that seemed to lean toward her as she went. In one cabin, a chessboard sat mid-game on a desk. The White Queen hovered one move from victory. The dust around the board was undisturbed except for two clean arcs where fingers had once rested, fresh. Her mouth dried. She cut across a narrower corridor, the air shifting colder, and found a utility closet with a slatted door. Inside, coils of frayed rope, a cracked mop bucket, a hand-cranked lantern that, miraculously, still turned. She pocketed it, and a stubby graphite pencil taped to the wall. When she closed the closet, something behind her answered with a tiny inhale of air, the negative space where a presence had been, or wanted to be. She didn't turn. The hum thickened when she acknowledged it. The stairwell was lit by a single wounded skylight high above, its glass fractured into 100 gray diamonds. The rail was damp beneath Sienna's palm. She climbed, counting the steps, habit, not caution, until she reached a landing where the paint had bubbled into blisters. A sign hung half off its screws: Bridge Access, authorized crew only. Below it, in faded Cyrillic, the same warning. Someone had cleaned the handle recently. The dust ended in a neat crescent around the latch. Her pulse leapt. She remembered the stage tables, the tidy bunks, the fork placed like an anchor in time. The ship was a museum curated by someone who did not expect visitors, only witnesses. She pressed the handle. The door gave reluctantly and swung inward with a groan. Consoles lined the walls like sleeping animals. Most were dead, screens gauzed with grime, but one panel in the corner glowed faintly, an anemic green pulse, slow as a heartbeat at rest. She leaned closer and squinted. The text was Russian. Emergency reserve power active. Her throat tightened with a thread of vindication. Alive, not ghost, system. On the captain's desk, a logbook lay open to blank pages as if it had been prepared for an entry that never came. Her gloved finger traced the gutter where something had been torn cleanly out. Names, she thought. Times. Orders. She pulled open drawers. Empty rope, a flare gun with one cracked cartridge, and ducked to peer beneath the desk. Her light caught on a small metal strongbox wedged against the back panel, secured by 4 rusted clasps. Of course, she whispered. She braced the box between her boots and worked the first clasp until it finally sighed open. The second fought harder. She slid her grandfather's multi-tool under and leveraged carefully, mindful of the brittle metal. It snapped and she flinched, waiting for the ship to protest. It didn't. The third gave with a complaint. The fourth required patience and a whispered promise to a man she had never met who had nonetheless taught her every trick of stubborn hardware. When it yielded, she lifted the lid. Inside, paper again, damp at the edges but legible, and beneath, a thin stack of cards embossed with a logo she recognized from the crew uniforms she'd filmed. Odyssey Cruise Lines, passports, dozens of them. Faces staring out, laminated smiles fixed forever, each stamped with ports that made no rational itinerary. Under the passports, a laminated slip of paper with a string of numbers and letters, not coordinates, not a serial. A code. She read it aloud. It felt wrong in her mouth, like the order of the sounds didn't match any language that knew air. The hum deepened. Across the bridge, a radio coughed and crackled to life. Sienna froze. She had not touched it. Static frothed, then parsed itself into something human-shaped and broken by time. Do, not, open, hold, sealed, contamination, risk. It repeated, weaker, then vanished. The panel light resumed its slow pulse like nothing had happened. Sienna's skin prickled. She stepped back and her hip knocked the desk. The passport slid. One fell, face up, a young woman with tired eyes and a small scar above her lip. The name beneath, Maria R. Galley. Sienna pictured the shaking script. Maria says there is a choir. Sienna put the passport back on top of the stack with a care that felt like apology and closed the strongbox. Answers wanted questions. Questions wanted courage. Courage wanted a direction. She had one, the hold. She left the bridge and descended, moving faster now as if momentum could outrun dread. On the second deck down, the corridor took a turn she did not remember. A door that had been open earlier was closed now, and a hatch she could have sworn lead aft revealed only a short cul-de-sac. The ship had shifted in small ways that would make you doubt your memory before you doubted it. She forced herself to mark lefts and rights with faint pencil crosses at shoulder height, a breadcrumb trail that the ship could not rearrange. As she moved, the environment clarified itself. The air cooled, the smell of rot thinned and was replaced by something metallic and faintly sweet, like the memory of spilled chemicals. The hum took on a new timbre, less the drone of a machine and more the resonance of a chamber tuned to a single note. It vibrated most in her teeth. She fought the urge to clench. At the end of a long passageway laced with sagging pipes, she reached a bulkhead that loomed like a door to a vault. A steel wheel lock sat at its center, eaten at the edges by rust but still functional. Painted around it, and once bright hazard yellow, were warnings now reduced to ghosts: the International Radiation Trefoil, a biohazard symbol, a skull stylized into bureaucratic neutrality. Above them, a stenciled word, flayed by time, in 3 languages she knew and, she thought, 1 she did not. She placed her palm against the door. The metal hummed back. In the silence that followed, she felt the journal in her pack like a second spine. We were told it was medicine. It was not. The radio voice like a lifeline thrown too late. Do not open. Hold. Contamination risk. Sienna lifted the multi-tool and set its blade to the chain that looped the wheel. The link didn't so much resist as reminisce. It had been strong once. She twisted. It moaned. It broke. The sound ricocheted down the corridor like a shot. She froze. The hum paused, a half-breath, and then returned, deeper, as if the ship had decided it could continue to tolerate her. Sienna closed her eyes and let herself remember June for exactly 1 breath. "You don't run from silence," she had said in another life to a reporter who wanted a soundbite. "You walk into it, you break it." She set both hands to the wheel and turned. The seal sighed. A gust of air spilled out, stale and bitter, scented with an acid tang that clawed the back of her throat. Lights that did not belong to daylight stirred in the dark. Small, uncommitted glows from long-buried panels. The hum grew into the room like fog. Sienna lifted her camera, thumbed it on, and stepped through. She did not look back. The bulkhead yielded with a final metallic sigh, and Sienna stepped into air that felt like it had slept for years and woken up angry. It was colder here, a cellar chill that settled under the skin, carrying a faint tang like burnt sugar over rust. Her beam swung across a cathedral of steel, a cargo hold that stretched in ranks and shadows, a grid of containers stacked 3 high, their walls pitted and streaked with mineral scars. Some were crushed inward as if gripped by an invisible fist. Others were intact but cross-hatched with warning stencils, triangles, trefoils, hazard pictograms half erased by time and damp. The hum was louder. It didn't fill the room so much as the room amplified it, a single unbroken note sloping up and down in micro-intervals like a machine thinking. Sienna pinched the ridge of her nose against the sting in her sinuses and spoke low, the recorder pressed close to her throat. Cargo hold, multiple containers, chemical and radiation signage present. Air quality wrong. She picked a narrow aisle and moved, boots clicking on grating, light stuttering over bolt heads and welded seams. Her body fell into an old mechanic's inventory, counting, labeling, triangulating noise to source and structure. The hum came strongest from the spine of the hold and from somewhere beyond the far wall, as if there were a second chamber. Along the way, she saw ruptures. One container yawning open like a split rib, its interior lacquered in an oil-slick sheen. Broken ampules glittered in the beam like teeth. A lattice of shredded plastic curled and tightened, as if reacting to the light, though she knew it was only a trick of heat and memory. "This wasn't medicine," she whispered. The sentence tasted like iron. Further on, a container door had been braced shut with a crowbar wedged through its handles and torqued against a riveted strut. Someone had improvised strength here, quickly, desperately. A torn label clung to the metal by one corner, its text ghosting in 3 languages and a string of alphanumerics. She lifted the camera, framed it, and then took a still, belt and suspenders redundancy. Halfway down the row, she found the first evidence of the people who had fought this room. A canvas tool roll splayed open on the grating. A flashlight, dead. A rag stiff with some varnish-like residue. Beneath the roll, a crumpled, waterlogged pass card with the Odyssey logo, the name blurred but not the title, Assistant Engineer. She put it gently back where it had fallen, as if touching it louder might summon the wrong attention. The grating vibrated underfoot. Not a trick of hearing. She could feel it in her ankles now, a pulse that seemed to anticipate her steps by a half beat. She stopped and let the hum pass through her. A pause. A resumption. Moreno had written of pulse and count. She matched her breath to it for 3 cycles until it felt like exhaling inside a metronome. At the end of the lane, a door stood where a wall should have been, an inserted panel not part of the ship's original design. Its frame was raw welded, its paint too clean beneath the dust. To the right, a recessed panel blinked a tired blue. Sienna leaned in. Tiny numerals rolled, stalled, rolled again. Above them, a line of text that her mind refused at first, then translated the familiar alphabet out of its unfamiliar arrangement. OX power, hold subsystem, active. Active, she echoed, not to the camera but to whatever was listening through the steel. A bundle of cables, sleeved in cracked rubber, snaked from the panel into the wall and disappeared. She followed them with her light and saw where they fed. A squat generator tucked into a service nook, its casing marine grade, its paint blistered. For a heartbeat she thought it was running. There was that same sense of a live animal restrained, but the inspection ports were dark. power was seeping through the line from elsewhere, not made here. The generator was a relay, a lung held open by a machine offstage. She squatted and brushed dust from a metal placard. The manufacturer's data was in English. The safety notes were duplicated in Cyrillic. A date stamp, older than the Odyssey's supposed launch by several years. Retrofitted. She swung her light up, tracing the cable run across the overhead. It passed through a sealed grommet and, beyond that, into a space she couldn't name. The radio voice returned to her in a static memory. Do not open. Hold. Sealed contamination risk. The words had the cadence of procedure, the emptiness of a lifeboat lowered after everyone had drowned. She stood and pressed 2 fingers to the panel's glow. Cold. The hum deepened, as if the ship noted her mark and filed it under present. Then the light flickered and the recessed speaker beneath the display coughed. Static froth around syllables like waves around rock. Hold, not, open, seal, maintain, exposure, risk. It wasn't a message designed to be heard once. It was a ritual, an instruction repeated until it cut grooves in the air. She pictured a hand set in a loop and walking away forever. Sienna pivoted back into the hold proper. Containers organized themselves into a geometry now, as if the blue glow had taught her where to look. Some were identical, industrial sameness with numbers scraped to illegibility. Others wore hand-painted symbols over the old stencils, hasty circles and crossed lines, guards assigned by people with no better language to contain fear. One bore a ring of chalk around its seam. Beneath the chalk, a smear of something that had etched the paint into a matte crater. It was old. It was still wrong. At the far wall, a smaller door, waist-high like an access hatch, was sealed with a wheel smaller than the main bulkheads. Sienna crouched and listened. The hum on the other side had a different timbre. Higher, almost a harmonic. She pressed the ridge of her ear to the metal and closed her eyes. Under the hum, another sound, a soft hiss, intermittent, like a bypass valve bleeding pressure. She pulled back. There's a second chamber, she recorded, or a chamber within a chamber. Pressure equalization still cycling. Behind her, footsteps. Slow, wet, deliberate. They came from somewhere deep in the grid and stopped when she turned. She lifted the flashlight and found only the long corridors of steel. The hairs along her forearms rose, a primitive diagnostic older than tools. She moved sideways into shadow and killed the beam. The blue panel was enough to draw a faint outline out of the dark. Silence pooled and then broke. The sound resumed, 1, 2, 3 steps, then nothing. As if whatever made them measured the same pattern she had, matching breath and hum. She stayed where she was, the camera recording her breathing, her heartbeat a counterpoint to the ship's. Not empty, she whispered when the quiet thickened again. She relit the torch and chose another aisle, this one angled toward a slatted office wedged into the hold's starboard side. A manager's cube built of welded mesh and acrylic, the ad hoc control room of a space meant not to be seen. The door was ajar. Inside, a desk tilted under the weight of a rusted terminal, a monitor fogged white. Beneath it, a drawer hung open, swollen by damp. Sienna tugged and it grudgingly revealed its contents. Plastic folders fused together, a half-dozen identification badges, a stamped metal tag that read, Hold OPS. She thumbed through until a looser bundle lifted free. A notebook sealed in a leather case. It wasn't Moreno's hand this time. The script was blockier, the languages shifting mid-sentence, notes quantified and bracketed like an engineer scrawling against time. Aux circuits rerouted through secondary buses. Primary breakers fused from heat. Keep below 40% draw or she breathes. She breathes either way. Aid pallets vary in weight from manifest. Density off by 12-18%. Contents unknown. Container seams re-welded post-load. Directive from Special Liaison. Hold sealed at all times. Crew to remain clear. Noncompliance triggers quarantine. Cycle observed in resonance. 7, 5, 7 beats, then pause. Not engine, not pump, not machine. Do not align all panels to green simultaneously. When all green, the air bends. Sienna's mouth dried as the hum climbed a half step, as if the ship wanted to underline the last line. She slid the notebook into her pack and the waterproof case pressed against it. The other lives she was already carrying. A soft blue flare washed across the office mesh and faded. She turned. The panel in the wall beyond the inserted door had pulsed brighter, then settled. The cables sang faintly. The hiss behind the small hatch stuttered, went quiet, returned. The timing was wrong for a simple pressure release. It was closer to, she swallowed, the cycle written in a stranger's block hand. She backed out of the office and crossed to a low table buckled by time. On it, a neat array of masks, filters long expired, elastic slack, but arranged with symmetry. Beside them, a pair of gloves and a tape spool. Sienna picked up the tape. Someone had used it last. The edge was torn at a diagonal, set to peel again easily. She thought of the staged dining room, chairs tucked, napkins crisp, a museum curated by a rule no one had been brave enough to break. "Who are you?" she called softly to the hold itself. "What are you?" Her voice went out and came back smaller. The hum continued. The footsteps did not return. Somewhere above, a pipe let go a single drop of water that found metal and rang. Sienna moved to the smaller hatch. Against her better judgment, against the radio, against the journal, against the ring of chalk, she laid her hand on the wheel and turned it a fraction. It resisted, then rolled a degree, metal rasping against a swollen gasket. A thread of air kissed her knuckles, cool, chemically sweet. The skin there tingled as if brushed by mint and ash. She closed it. The tingling remained. "Not opening that," she recorded, voice low. "I heard you." Back along the main row, a faint light bled under a seam where a door had warped away from its frame. Not blue this time, something more clinical, a white with a green stomach. She slid sideways and peered through the slit. A small chamber lay beyond. 4 walls lined with panels, each panel a summary of a system. Pressure, flow, status, status, status. Most were dead. 2 were alive. 1 blinked in the same patient green she had seen on the bridge. The other, lower left, tickered with symbols she could not decode, a language that remembered hers but didn't choose it. The speaker above that panel clicked. Syllables shuffled into place. Hold, not, open, maintain, seal, exposure, risk. The message wasn't a warning anymore. It was a heartbeat, the words keeping time with the hum, the way the ship spoke itself back into being every few seconds so it wouldn't have to admit what silence meant. Sienna reached for the door handle out of reflex and stopped, hand hovering an inch away. The metal was cold enough to burn. She pictured Moreno's last line, "Do not be the lid lifter." She lifted her hand away, slow, as if from an animal that could bite. Behind her, somewhere in the dark forest of containers, something shifted weight. Not a footstep this time. A redistribution, like a person repositioning the watch more comfortably. Sienna didn't swing the light. She kept it down, sweeping the floor in a narrow band, and stepped back into the main aisle without turning her back to the chamber. "Not alone," she whispered, a record and a prayer. She retreated along the path she'd taken in, marking again with tiny graphite crosses. Twice her pencil marks had been smeared. Once, one had been underlined by a finger that was not hers. cleaner than the air should allow. She pretended not to see that, because seeing turned the ship from a system into a witness, and witnesses ask you to testify in return. At the bulkhead, she palmed the wheel and paused. The hum pressed against her as if reluctant to let her go or indifferent to which way the boundary ran. She thumbed the camera off, then on again. Back up. Redundancy had kept her alive longer than courage ever had. Summary, she said, voice steadier than she felt. Hold is sealed by design and ritual, auxiliary power sustaining subsystems, chemical and radiation warnings present across multiple containers, evidence of retrofits and unauthorized cargo, evidence of crew actions to restrain or segregate loads, evidence of ongoing cycle, pressure bleed, panel status, message loop. Something is still running. Something is still counting. She closed the door. The wheel turned, the seal receded, and the bittersweet tang thinned back to the manageable wrongness of the upper decks. In the corridor, she braced both hands on the rail and let her breath finally misbehave. The ship creaked around her, old bones relieved of a momentary burden. Up 2 flights, the air warmed a degree. The smell of chemical memory receded enough for salt and rust to reassert themselves like familiar arguments. As she reached the landing, she froze. A word had been carved into the wall at chest height, letters fresh enough that flakes of paint still curled outward around the grooves. Wait. Not dust settled, not old, not patient, commanding. Sienna frowned. She brought the light close. Tiny beads of moisture sat in the letter cuts, due on the edges of an hour. She remembered the fork in the hallway, the chessboard mid-game, the cleaned bridge handle, the underlined pencil mark, curation, not by a machine alone. "What are you waiting for?" she asked the letters. They did not answer. The hum did. She pushed off the rail and kept moving. On the next deck, a lounge she'd passed before looked altered in a way that refused to be specific. The piano's lid was now ajar by an inch. She hadn't touched it. The chandelier strand hung still. She angled the light and saw a new path through the dust across the carpet. One faint track, not shoe-shaped, wider, as if someone had dragged a bundle or as if weight had been distributed not through feet but along a limb that didn't care for ankles. She bit the inside of her cheek to force her mind back into mechanic mode. Angles, loads, systems. She had what she had come for. Confirmation. She had what she had not wanted. Presence. Back at the stair spine, she halted and listened. Above, the quiet of abandonment. Below, the measured insistence of the hold. On level with her, the silence that felt like a held breath between them. "Tomorrow," she said into the recorder. "Tomorrow, though time here had no anchor. I map exterior access. I identify ventilation routes. I do not open anything else." Her voice firmed on that last line as if speaking it created the rules she'd follow. She descended 1 level to a service corridor and found an exit marked by an arrow that no longer pointed anywhere accurate. A final turn and she was at a hatch to the outer deck, warped but workable. She leaned her shoulder into it until the rust coughed and the door surrendered to a triangle of green light bleeding through jungle. Outside, sound returned in small ways. Leaf drip, insect buzz, a breeze too tired to move more than a single frond. She stepped onto the deck and let the hull's vibration translate through her boots into the open air. The hum was present even here, damped by vines and distance, a bass note under the living choir of the island. She followed the perimeter, skirting gaps where the deck plates had fallen inward, until she reached a section where the jungle had mounted the ship like a siege ladder. From here, she could see the slope down to the black sand shore. Her skiff was a pale scar against it, patient as a dog. She stood with her palm on the Odyssey's skin and felt it answer, the way a transformer answers a test prod. "You're alive," she said, "and you're not alone." The wind nosed at the trees. For a moment, it sounded like a voice trying a word and forgetting it. By the time she reached the beach, the eastern sky had grayed. Fog muscled up from the horizon and rolled toward the island like a deliberate tide. Sienna dragged her gear above the rack line and set the waterproof case in the middle of her tarp like a compass of value. She sat cross-legged and reviewed the camera. A flicker of green panel, a grid of warnings, the auxiliary display, the hatch wheel, the hiss, the almost words. She recorded one more note for an audience she still hadn't decided to trust. They didn't abandon a failure. They quarantined a success. Not medicine, not for us. The hold is working. And someone, something, keeps the ritual. Her hands were steadier now. Fear had found an argument inside her that it could not win. She sealed the case, stood, and turned her face to the jungle. The ship's silhouette showed through the mist like a mountain pretending to be a secret. From somewhere within it, as if answering her summary with one of its own, the hum changed. Not a surge, not louder, different. The pattern adjusted by one beat, 757 becoming 75. Pause. 7. A version of a nod. Sienna exhaled a laugh that didn't feel like laughter. Message received. The fog thickened. The beach narrowed. The ship did not move, and yet she could feel it waiting. She curled under the tarp, the case under her hand, and let exhaustion steal a few minutes of a night that no longer had hours. Behind her closed eyes, panels blinked, voices looped, and metal remembered orders. Above the hiss of the shore, a second sound threaded in. Footsteps on steel, unhurried and precise, walking a route someone had walked every day for years. She didn't open her eyes. She already knew what the next day had decided. She would go back. Dawn didn't so much arrive as admit defeat. The fog lay heavy on the water, pressing the horizon until it disappeared. Sienna woke with the case under her palm and the Odyssey's hum scrolling through the last of her dreams. The beach had narrowed overnight. The tide licked closer, patient and methodical. Somewhere above, a bird tried to call and thought better of it. She sat up, checked the cameras, and thumbed through her notes until the ritual steadied her hands. The footage was there. The auxiliary panel's green pulse, the warning stencils, the improvised crowbar brace, the hiss behind the inner hatch, the looped voice repeating a procedure long after anyone was left to hear it. Proof had a weight. It lived in the spine. She felt taller with it. There was nothing left to find that she could reach without becoming what Moreno had begged her not to be. Lid lifter. Witness would have to be enough. Sienna set her tripod on the black sand, framed the Odyssey through the thinning trees behind her, and hit record. The fog breathed in and out behind her shoulders like a living backdrop. She looked into the lens until she could see June's face there, bright, expectant, and spoke as if to her. "My name is Sienna Moore. I was a mechanic. I became a drifter. Then I found a ship in a place where ships do not belong. Its name is the Odyssey." She told the facts like bolts tightened in sequence. Passenger cabins made up and waiting. A dining room staged as if for inspection. Crew quarters holding a cook's journal that said aloud what the ship refused to. We were told it was medicine. It was not. A cargo hold sealed by design and guarded by ritual. Containers with chemical and radiation warnings. An auxiliary system still feeding a heart that refused to stop. a voice repeating instructions into a silence that had outlived its audience. "They didn't sink her because she failed," Sienna said, and the fog took the line and made it visible. "They hid her because she worked. They locked the crew inside and walked away. They turned a ship into a quarantine and a secret into a monument." She paused. The lens tried to blink and couldn't. Her reflection stared back. Salt-tangled hair, eyes that learned to listen to machines until they started hearing everything. "If I don't make it back, make sure this footage does," she said softly at first, then again steady enough to carve. "I won't be part of that silence." She clicked the camera off and felt a clean edge move through her. Conviction. It didn't erase fear. It taught it how to stand someplace else. Packing was quick. She broke the tripod down by muscle memory, slid the drives into the waterproof case, wrapped the journals in plastic, sealed the zipper with deliberate care. The skiff moved under her hands like an animal that had been waiting for a signal it understood. She pushed it into the gray water and glanced once over her shoulder. The Odyssey loomed as a silhouette, a mountain pretended into steel. For a moment, Sienna imagined the letters on its hull flexing like a throat. She raised 2 fingers in a gesture that was not a salute and not a goodbye, and waited out until the skiff floated free. The engine coughed, shuddered, then caught with a sound that was both relief and apology. The compass spun its familiar circle. The GPS flashed its refusal to acknowledge reality. The fog drew its curtain back across the shore. She kept her bow pointed towards the blank and held a line by faith and stubbornness. Hours become a posture before they become time. When the fog thinned, it revealed only more water. When it thickened, it filled the world to the width of her boat. She drank in sips. She rationed the voice in her head that wanted a horizon. On the second day, the engine stalled and came back with a kick like a heartbeat starting after a long pause. On the third night, stars returned in a handful, enough to remind her that mathematics still existed, even if coordinates did not. She tied the case to her wrist when she slept and woke with the marks of the strap in her skin like a brand of purpose. On the 5th morning, a shadow crossed the skiff and became a plane, a low-flying survey craft that at first didn't see her and then very much did. She stood and waved until her arms burned and her throat forgot how to hold back. The plane banked, circled, and called a name she hadn't heard in days. Hers. The rescue blurred into heat and hands and a smell like antiseptic trying to erase salt. The case sat on a metal table within reach of her bed when she woke hours later, untouched, the zipper's seal unbroken. She laughed, raw and cracked, and laid her palm on it. "You let me go," she whispered, not to Luck or to men in uniforms, but to the ship she had refused and thanked in the same breath. The world arrived fast and disbelieving. A doctor took blood. A nurse took notes. A man with a badge asked questions with the careful tone of someone aware that the answers might be heavier than the room. Sienna spoke in the same order she had learned under a hood. Largest bolts first, then smaller, never cross-thread the truth. When they let her shower, the water came away gray and then clear. When they let her eat, her hands shook on the spoon. When they let her open the case, she did so with witnesses, the footage, the journals, the passports, and the stamped logo, the auxiliary panel blinking patiently, the radio voice telling a procedure to an empty bridge until it became a prayer. Proof, end to end, like a circuit. She gave one interview because it felt like an extension of the message, not a detour from it. The host was careful, but not cold, smart enough to let silence work when a question would bruise it. "Weren't you terrified?" he asked. going deeper, knowing you might not come back. Sienna held the camera's dark eye in her memory and June's brighter one behind it. "I was," she said, "but someone had to listen to the voices no one else heard. You don't run from silence. You walk into it. You break it." The clip of her statement traveled first like a rumor and then like weather. Students wrote it on notebook covers. Commentators clipped it into the front of arguments. Someone stenciled it on a wall above a port where cargo ships idled under floodlights. "I won't be part of that silence." The letters looked different in each place and meant the same thing. The footage itself did what footage does when it shows you something your mind wants to refuse. It was argued and praised and slowed down frame by frame, called the discovery of the decade by some, and a sophisticated fraud by others who had never seen how patient rust could be. The looped voice became a sound people woke up hearing in their heads. "Do not open. Hold. Sealed contamination risk." It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a line the world could not stop reading back to itself. Sienna did not tour her own story. She answered what she had to, sent copies of the journals to people who would know how to preserve them, and put the passport stack into hands that might deliver names to living rooms that had been missing them for years. Then she turned down deals that wanted to turn the Odyssey into an animated monster or a brandable myth. Some truths do not behave under licensing. 6 months later, a ship left a harbor with an alliance instead of a sponsor. Journalists who had burned their tongues on official statements before. Scientists with specialties that rhymed with the symbols Sienna had filmed. Mariners who knew how to find lines in oceans that refused them. They had Sienna's footage. They had her handwritten coordinates. They had a way to index the hum that a graduate student had extracted and turned into a tool. They had everything but humility. Humility had to be earned on location. Their last transmission was a check-in as ordinary as a grocery list. Position, heading, weather, status, the clipped ease of professionals who trust their own caution. Then the radio stuttered and said nothing else. The plane that went to look for them saw fog arranged in an architecture no satellite could account for. The Coast Guard logged conditions and recommended waiting. Sienna didn't recommend anything. She watched the part of the world where the map had lied and felt the old hum in her bones again. The way memory becomes a sense you never planned to have. Conjectures assembled, tidy as chairs in a dining room that had never seen dinner. Some said hoax because a hoax let the world remain uncomplicated. Some said conspiracy because a conspiracy gave it order. Some said math because pressure gradients and weather systems make excellent villains. Sienna said nothing publicly and almost nothing privately. Silence can be surrender. It can also be the precise tool you need for a precise job. She had already said the sentences that mattered. Anything else would be a commentary on a hymn. In a second interview she had not planned to give, but did because a mother's email had names in it that matched 2 of the passports. She was asked what the Odyssey meant. Not in the headline sense. In the way a thing sits in a life after the lights and arguments fade. It means we are very good at burying what works when it was never supposed to, she said. It means sometimes you find a system that's still following orders after everyone who gave them is gone. It means you decide what kind of witness you're going to be. She didn't talk about June on camera, though the story was impossible without her. She told it to herself when the apartment was quiet. A doc, a question about where the world ends. A promise made with more conviction than information. You walk toward edges. You measure what you can. You write down what you saw. People sent her letters. Some believed she had saved them from their own versions of silence. Some accused her of waking a thing that had been sleeping in peace. Some asked if the hum ever went away. She answered that last one once, "No, but you learn how to carry it." The Odyssey kept waiting in a place where water wore a fog like armor. Sienna learned the shape of her days again. Less salt, more glass, the smell of coffee a rehearsal for normalcy. She fixed small things because the hands want what they want. A radio with a bad tuner, a bicycle with a stubborn chain, a neighbor's fan. People cried in kitchens when the fan worked again. The world scaled Meenan up and down with no permission. Now and then she woke thinking she had heard footsteps on a metal deck measured against a metronome. She would lie there and count the beats. 7, 5, 7, pause. Not engine, not pump, not machine. A system that had learned breath. Her message lived a life of its own. It showed up on banners at marches that had nothing to do with ships. It turned into bracelets and into chalk lines on sidewalks that rain couldn't quite erase. In a classroom, a girl raised her hand and said it aloud, and the room changed shape around her. A boy in a shop class etched it into the handle of a tool he was afraid to lose. Someone painted it under a bridge where water pooled, a quiet place that multiplied echoes. When strangers recognized her, they usually said, "Thank you." Once, a man told her to leave well enough alone. She nodded. He didn't know that leaving is not the opposite of telling. One evening, months after the Alliance's last transmission, the dusk tilted toward storm, and the radio on Sienna's kitchen counter coughed. She hadn't turned it on. The speaker bled static, then gathered itself into a voice distorted by distance. Not, open, hold, sealed. The rest broke apart. She stood with her hand on the dial she had not touched and waited. The radio sighed into quiet. The hum in her chest reminded her where edges are and how you stand on them. She turned the set off and went to the window. Far away, weather rearranged itself into a wall. Closer, the city moved through its evening like a machine meant for people. She thought of Moreno's letter in a shoe, of Maria's passport and the tiny scar above her lip, of the chessboard waiting for a hand that had learned not to play, of a word carved at chest height that had been a command and a benediction. Wait. Sometimes waiting is complicity. Sometimes it is an act of precision. Sometimes it is what you do when you have put evidence into the world and trust it to weigh more than your voice ever could. The Odyssey did not sink, but the silence around it did, disrupted enough that people had to choose how to hear it. Sienna had not wanted a legacy. She had wanted a truth to stop being alone. She got both. On quiet nights, when the city kept its promises and the fan she had fixed turned a room into weather, she closed her eyes and could still find the hold in the dark. The auxiliary panel pulsed. The message looped, and the hum counted. She would stay there for a few breaths and then open her eyes and step back into the life she had decided to keep. Truth doesn't always scream. It hums. When it does, someone has to listen. They didn't sink the ship because it failed. They hid it because it worked. Sienna's courage reminds us that the truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hums. And when it does, someone has to listen. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And share this video with someone who believes the truth is worth chasing, no matter how deep it's buried.